So this is something of a mystery shrouded in an enigma, and outside of that is a couple of turnips. The SAG and bias controls in the Helix amps, I got sent a message on Patreon by a chap asking if I would sort of look into what they actually do. So I've prepared some samples for you. I'm using a Vox AC30, Essex A30, so the top boost channel of a Vox, and also the litigator with some lead tones, just to try and get a sense for what these do. So what I've found just quickly is that the SAG, when you have it all the way off, you get a more kind of open, less compressed sound and feel. As you push it all the way up, you get a drop in volume, like a real drop in volume of about between 3 and 4 dB was what I was finding. And also things are more compressed. So to get the comparison that I'm showing you here, what I did was bring the volume back up to be commensurate or equal to the other thing, to my perception at least. Yeah, and so what I found was if you listen to the Vox samples, just my thinking is that one sounds like there's a little bit less of the kind of distortion elements and stuff like that, and then it starts to close in a bit the more you turn the SAG up, right? Because you're kind of compressing things a little bit. The same is true for driven presets, by the way. So I tried with the litigator and the Vox. The SAG seems to uniformly, you know, sort of close off the sound a bit more the more you turn it. So it's working basically like a compressor is what I'm thinking. and drops the volume ever so slightly. So if you were experimenting with this SAG stuff, I would also experiment to make sure that you're comparing like for like, just up the level a bit. So I feel, for me personally, I think I prefer the sound of settings with the SAG lower than default mostly. The feel is a little bit more immediate, and also the sound is a little bit more open, and there's less of like these fizzy things and hummy things getting into the tone. It's not a huge difference, but there is a small difference for me. The bias thing works a bit differently. So when you have the bias all the way off on the Vox tones, I found that that had a bit more spikiness and a bit more fizz to it. Whereas as you started to turn the bias all the way up, there was a drop in gain and sort of a fluffier sound to the note for some reason. The opposite was true in the litigator world though. So With the bias all the way off, there was like a less gain, less of that kind of upper harmonic stuff. And then as I turn the litigator all the way up, you get more of that fizzy stuff, more high-end presence as I turn the bias full up on the litigator. So that was interesting to me. But those were my initial findings. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'll share some other kind of bits and pieces on screen with you now. But that was my kind of preliminary thing. Also, if you look in the manual, there's like a short description for what these do. I think there's also a book from Sweetwater which covers this stuff, which I might try and find a screen grab of. But yeah, have an experiment with these. These are not necessarily things that I think are going to make or break a preset. Unless you fiddle with them to the extreme, in which case you can get things to sound a little bit darker than what you potentially might want. But what I might try doing is setting that sag all the way off for things, just because I think that's where my preference is. Maybe. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. So I would definitely give the Sweetwater article a read. I'll link it in the comments below. But here's a preset with the treble and presence at 0 at the moment. So I'm going to just bring these in to see if this makes a difference to how some of this behaves. Go into the amp parameters. So this is what I'm saying about sag. So with sag all the way off, you know, it is actually making quite a big difference. So that's worth knowing, that that sag really does drop the level considerably if you have it maxed. So it is literally working pretty much like a compressor. The thing that I wanted to test though is this bias element. So if I turn this all the way off, I'm definitely getting less gain when I turn that all the way down, versus on SX-A30, if we try this, I'm going to put the drive to like 6.5. Less gain. Less gain as we turn up the bias, for sure. So with the Vox style amp, you might want to experiment with upping that bias a bit, because that's giving you a bit of a less brash sound. I mean, that's totally... Is it not a totally different kind of... Like, that is as different as things kind of get, which I wasn't finding so much with some of the other amp models, but... Let's see, does that also hold true for some other amps? So let's try the Matchless Channel 2. So I think we're talking about sort of heavier tones really. So if I turn the SAG all the way down, that seems to be uniform, the SAG, right? This bias thing. Yeah, we're losing gain. And then what happens as we turn up the drive with that? I think that might be a bit of a something that everyone should know about, right? Let's try this with the twin. It's having less of an impact where there's less gain, but it is still doing something similar, right? Let's try with something. I don't know if this is going to be more difficult to hear what's going on than a mid-gain tone or not. So what we got? Definitely a bit of a different interaction there, right? So it seems like there seems to be like a bit of a changing sweet spot for each of these amps depending on your setting. So I guess what we're learning from this is that it's definitely worth playing around with. So that is actually an incredibly powerful control, the bias. So I would necessarily maybe turn SAG down in general using this bias. Can completely change the character of the amp. It's a bigger difference than I was expecting. The SAG, I think, until you get to the extremes of like over 8, is not that big a difference. But this bias, particularly on driven tones, is making a huge difference to the character of most of these amps. So let's try this full and bright. So maybe give that a try. Certainly the bias, I think, is making a pronounced difference. And if you're thinking, I'm not really liking this, there's too much fizziness in these tones or whatever, you could try experimenting with upping that bias. And what that seems to do in quite a few of the amp models is bring out a little bit more warmth. I think according to Sweetwater, you are increasing the amount of even harmonics, supposedly you're more prone to emphasize even harmonics and slightly less overall distortion, apparently. So worth trying, I think. Yeah, give that a play. Let me know your thoughts. Have you got kind of go-to bias settings or SAG settings? I think for me that 0 SAG setting is not a bad thing at all. This bias thing, I think you could kind of sweep and find something a little bit warmer, particularly if you were going for warmer tones that are going to sit in ears a little bit better. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Cheers.